Hello, and welcome to True Crime ESL, true crime stories for English learners. I'm your host, Nova Singh. In the video description, there's a link to a free document with vocabulary descriptions and a transcript for this episode that you can download. Can you find the 2 special phrases from the document in today's story? Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy this podcast and want to hear more. Today, our story is about Jack the Ripper. In England, in 1888, people in the Whitechapel area of London were living in fear of a murderer walking among them. Women, especially those who were working in the sex trade, were being killed in the dead of night. They were found with their throats cut and other body parts removed or mutilated. Police believed that at least 5 women who were murdered between August and November of 1888 were killed by the same person. These confirmed victims, not all of whom were sex workers, were Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. It is also possible that the real number of victims was higher. The 5 confirmed victims were killed in similar ways. Mary Ann Nichols was found lying in the street with her throat cut. Some newspapers reported that her head had nearly been cut off. She was killed very early in the morning, and people were walking nearby, although nobody heard or saw anything suspicious. When her body was examined, doctors found lots of knife wounds in her stomach. Some of these wounds were so deep that her internal organs could be seen. The killer must have worked very quickly, or maybe Mary Ann Nichols was killed somewhere else before being left in the street. Annie Chapman was also found outside, in the backyard of a house, on the 8th of September 1888. Her throat had been slashed twice, and part of her uterus had been cut out and removed from her body. A leather apron was found nearby, which some people think may have belonged to the killer. After the murder of Annie Chapman, a newspaper in London received a letter which started with the words, "Dear Boss." The letter was written in red ink, used disturbing language, and talked about wanting to kill again. The letter writer called the murders his funny little games, and said in his next attack he would clip the lady's ears off. It was signed Jack the Ripper, the first time that name had been used. As news of the letters and the murders spread, the name became more and more famous. Ripper referred to the way the killer cut into his victims' bodies. Jack the Ripper's 3rd victim was Elizabeth Stride. She was found dead outside at 1 a.m. on the 30th of September 1888. Her neck had a very deep cut, and there was blood all over the ground. There was no other damage to her body, so some people think she wasn't a victim of Jack the Ripper. Others think that maybe the killer was worried about being seen, so he ran away. This could be true, as another woman, Catherine Eddowes, was killed on the same night, less than an hour later. A police officer found her body on the ground at 1:44 a.m. Her throat was cut, and some of her intestines were lying over her shoulder. A doctor saw her left kidney was missing. Part of her right ear had also been cut off, just like the first letter said. When police searched the area around the body, a piece of a blood-stained leather apron was found. It is not clear whether this belonged to Catherine Eddowes or Jack the Ripper. More letters and postcards were received by the police, newspapers, and other people who had been involved in the case, but most of these were pranks or hoaxes. One of these postcards was delivered to a news agency the day after the murders of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes. The writer called himself Saucy Jackie, and he called the two killings a double event. It has not been proved if the postcard was sent before or after the murders were made public in the newspapers. One man received a package containing a letter that said it was from hell. The package also contained a piece of human kidney, although it is unknown if it belonged to Catherine Eddowes. No clues were found in the letters to work out the identity of the killer. The handwriting in the Dear Boss and From Hell letters did not look the same, and the last letter was not signed. It just said, "Catch me when you can." Two of these letters and the kidney have since been lost. Jack the Ripper's last confirmed victim was 25-year-old Mary Jane Kelly. She was killed in November 1888 and was found inside her bedroom. Her face had been mutilated, and most of her internal organs had been removed and placed around the body. Her heart was missing. She was the most badly mutilated victim because the attack happened in a private room, not outside in public. After Mary Kelly was found, there were no more murders that matched the pattern for over 8 months. Then, in July 1889, Alice Mackenzie was killed in Whitechapel. She had 2 cuts to her neck, and her stomach had been stabbed, but the wounds were less severe than other victims, so police were not sure if Jack the Ripper had returned or not. The newspapers used the murder to get people interested in the story again. The last possible victim was Frances Coles, who was killed in Whitechapel on the 13th of February, 1891. She had 2 cuts to her throat and was found lying on the ground outside. Some people thought Jack the Ripper was to blame, but there were no other injuries to the body. A man who had been with her that night was arrested, but was freed because there was no good evidence against him. No more cases were linked to Jack the Ripper after this. At the end of the 19th century, the term serial killer had not yet been created. They were rare, but Jack the Ripper was not the first example. He became so famous because of the attention he received in the newspapers and because his identity was a mystery. He killed women quickly and quietly, and some people thought he must have had medical knowledge because of the way he cut into and removed his victims' internal organs. He might also have been a butcher. He knew the Whitechapel area well because his attacks were mostly done outside, and he disappeared after each one. There is one possible witness who might have seen Jack the Ripper just before the attack on Catherine Eddowes. A man saw someone he later thought was Catherine with a man about 30 years old, only 10 minutes before her body was discovered. This mystery man had light skin and a small, light-coloured moustache. He was wearing a grey cap and a loose jacket. People think that Jack the Ripper wore a large coat to cover any blood on his clothes after his attacks. In order to investigate the killings, police had to search the streets and go from house to house, but Jack the Ripper was always one step ahead. The only way to catch him would be to find him in the middle of attacking someone, but this never happened. There have been many suspects over the years, but nobody has proved who he was. Suspects have included the painter Walter Sickert, Prince Albert Victor, royal wigmaker William Clarkson, and a large number of local men. One of these local men was known as Leather Apron. He made shoes and used long knives. He was violent towards sex workers, but had an alibi for the first 2 murders. The aprons found near 2 of the victims might have been used by the killer to protect his clothes. They might have been used to pretend the shoemaker was the killer, or they might not have had anything to do with the murders. Another theory was that Jack the Ripper was actually a woman, or that more than one person was committing the murders. If the murders were committed now, we could use DNA evidence and other forensic techniques to find out more about the killer. In the 19th century, the police didn't have very much to help them. Even fingerprint identification was not commonly used at the time. There were dogs trained to hunt by smell, but they were somewhere else when the crimes were committed and weren't used because the police couldn't pay for them. Photographs were not taken at any of the crime scenes except for the last victim, Mary Kelly, who was killed inside. The bodies of the women killed outside were moved away quickly, so any evidence or clues were lost. Today, you can visit the Jack the Ripper Museum in the same Whitechapel area of London where the murders took place. There are also hundreds of books, films, and television shows about the story. We know a lot about the details of the case, but we may never know the true identity of Jack the Ripper. So that's all for today. Thanks for listening to True Crime ESL. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this podcast, and maybe tell a friend about it. You can follow us on Instagram at @TrueCrimeESL, and you can also buy us a coffee if you want us to keep making these podcasts. Today's story was written by Katy Watson, and all other production was by me, Nova Singh. Please download our free document for vocabulary, a transcript of today's story, and our story sources. You can find the link to the document in the video description. Take care, and stay safe out there, true crime fans.